those of you here in the audience, I want to welcome you to our final speaker series event of the spring. We are so excited to have completed several speaker series which really have touched on issues that matter to us as an agency, and we hope have helped the community be able to talk about mental health differently. We do this free speaker series because we really feel that it is important for us as an agency, for all seasons, to show up for the community in ways that may not be seen if you have to come to our agency and walk through our doors. Part of our investment in the community is to make sure that we have a message that is reaching people in different ways, and so we're thrilled that you're with us tonight. We want to talk about tonight the topic of parenting. Whether you are a parent, whether you are a caregiver, whether you're someone who has friends who have children, we know that parenting is a difficult topic. And we know that through the last couple of years, especially with the pandemic, our parents have experienced a different way to raise children. There's been different stressors in our community. And as your Community Behavioral Health and Rape Crisis Center, we wanted to shine a spotlight on parenting. And I am so excited to have with us tonight Lynn Sanchez, who has written the book called Behind the Brussels Sprouts. Lynn is a very good and longtime friend of mine. I've had the fortune of raising my two boys with the guidance of Lynn in every conversation that we've had. And it is so exciting for All Seasons to be partnering with Lynn, who is debuting her book this evening in an official launch with the Behind the Brussels Sprouts, sponsored with For All Seasons, to be able to help bring the information into the community. It is my hope that you tonight will take some nuggets of information and understand different ways that we can really trust who we are as parents and be able to share those little glimmers of moments of gifts with the children that are in our lives. And so with that, I'd like to let you know, if you are online, please feel free to write your questions as the presentation goes on. We will, at the end, do a Q&A, and we will be able to get those questions online. So please be interactive with us as the presentation goes on. And with that, I'd like to welcome Lynn Sanchez to the stage.
Thank you, Beth Ann. What a thrill to be here with all of you.
And I said to her son that we're going to do this. So her son and her husband, so if Jason and Rob and her sister-in-law Mary would please stand up, we're really glad to have family with us. So hoot and holler for them as well.
He is one of the survivors of my parenting, which is a good thing.
You know, Lynn, we've been talking about this for many, many weeks now, and I am just so thrilled to finally be here with you and sit down and be able to talk about your book and bring the book to the community. So I think to kick us off, it would be awesome for our community here, both online and in person, to have an understanding of why write this book.
Well, there were actually a couple of reasons why I wanted to write the book. I mean, I come before you as a mother who made so many mistakes. I was a yeller, I was a threatener, I was a spanker. None of it worked. And I was great at taking care of other people's children, but I didn't feel I was doing a very good job of taking care of my own. I forgot to trust myself. And so I wrote the book, and in the middle of it are lots of anecdotes, humorous anecdotes about the parenting journey that our family has taken, because I want parents to trust themselves, I want them to relax, and I want them to enjoy parenting. I was not a helicopter parent. I was a hovercraft. I was everywhere. I followed my children around like a bad smell. I mean, I was just always there worrying about things, and I forgot to relax. And so I just thought, if I can share some stories, share some experiences, some lessons learned along the way. I had 3 boys in 4.5 years and lived to tell about it. And so that was one of the primary reasons for writing the book.
And the book is amazing, and we're really excited that any of you that are with us tonight, both in person and online, we will be able to send the book to you if you're not with us in person, and those of you here tonight, once we're done with our talk, you'll get to take a copy of Lynn's book with you. So talk a little bit, if you would, about who the book is written for. So is it for the people who are raising little people? Is it for the people who have adolescents, teenagers? Where do you see the book fitting in?
I think it's all of the above. And it's also for anyone who is part of a child's life, be it a teacher, a grandparent. I have a section on distance grandparenting. Our grandson lived in LA, and we saw him once a year. And so we had to figure out a way to make that special, and we came up with some good ideas on that. I worry that so many parents, by the time their child gets to be 8 or 10, it's like all of the input from other places, it's like the children were kidnapped by the gypsies. It just all ends. And so I wanted to be sure and include a good section on ways of navigating pre-adolescence, adolescence, and just, helping, with that part of it too.
Because that's a tough age. And I'm speaking as a mom with a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and it is like something has happened to the children that I once snuggled and cuddled with.
That's right.
So that's a journey that is so sometimes difficult, and we forget that we might not know it all in the beginning.
Right. And then we think we've got it. It's like, ooh, I think I've got this. And then adolescence takes over, and pre-adolescence. And certainly today, parenting is so very different. Lots and lots of competition for children's minds and their spirits. And I worry about that. And so when children get older, I remember they started making sense. Their arguments were like good, and my because I said so wasn't going to work anymore because they had a better retort than I had an answer.
Or the retort is, when you ask them to do something, they respond with, I don't want to. Why not? Because. Well, that's what you say to me.
That's right, yeah. It's awful when you get that mirror,
right.
That parenting mirror, and you're like, oh no, that's me. I'm responding like myself. And I think we see too in the parenting mirror how we were raised. Yeah. And we have the option of some of the things we want to imitate, and some of the things we want to ignore. And but it's all there. It's all part of what I call my parenting backpack.
And that's a thing that I think as we talk about the journey of parenting, or as caregiving, or as anyone who is interacting with a child, sometimes we watch others do it. And I think especially now when we look at social media and we look at our social media outlets, like, even when we're looking at Instagram, it always looks like there is the perfect parent and that perfect family. We do a fabulous job as communities of putting our very best out on social media. And one of the things that I share with folks a lot because of the pandemic is that working and running for all seasons and being home and schooling my children and trying to keep it all together, I say continuously, I did not show up as my best parent, but I watched everything scroll on social media, and I continued to find myself falling into the perfect parent trap of thinking I was the only one suffering.
Right.
And I know your book does a beautiful job of addressing that issue.
There are no perfect parents. You're a perfect parent if you are meeting the needs of your child. And you are providing them with stability and love and value, then you're a perfect parent. That doesn't mean your children are always well behaved. It doesn't mean that there aren't bumps in the road. I call them the Christmas card letter families. Those dreaded Christmas card letters. You would just read them and think, oh my goodness, this just can't be. Every family has its challenges. If it works for you and the values you've set, parents are willing to pay a very high price to maintain a family value. And if you have a family value and you are maintaining it, then you're doing a good job. What else in life are we perfect at?
Right.
You know, there is nothing, but we set ourselves up as parents as we got to be perfect. We've got to get this right. I mention in the book that I think probably any parent or grandparent has heard of this woman. She is a saint. She has never done anything wrong, and her children have the best life in the world, and that woman is everyone else's mother.
That's right.
She showed up at our dinner table, I don't know how many times. Well, everybody else's mother lets their children do this, and everybody else's child. So I decided that for everybody else's mother, I got to have an everybody else's child. Everybody else's child's on the honor roll. Everybody else's child seems to keep the room clean. That woman disappeared off the face of the earth. She no longer appeared at our dinner table.
I'm so excited to have my next meal with my children. You know, when we talk about perfect parents, then sometimes we get stuck in our stuff. And I think one of the beauties of our conversations, as we've talked about sort of the launching of your book, and as you've shared with us your antidotes, and you and I have been doing some community presentations together, we forget sometimes that as people, we get stuck in our mistakes, and we sometimes focus really hard in on what we're not doing well. And so, is there any advice that you would have for parents who sometimes might get stuck in the continued what we're doing wrong?
I think you have to lead from the strength. What's right here? You know, what at the end of the day, every child is unique. And if they're all born with their own unique temperament, their own style of facing the world. I had a colleague once who said that second and third children and fourth and fifth children, they fill unoccupied niches in the family. That's why children are so different. So you think, okay, I've got this. This is working really well. And then the next child comes along and it's not going, so now you're feeling like a total failure with this. We have to be as flexible as a slinky. You have to be able to just roll with the punches. And we have to look at what we're doing right. Parenting is a full-time job with no vacations. And it's a lifetime job. I mean, unfortunately, my son will probably tell you, I'm still parenting. And it's a hard habit to break. But we have to understand we are the expert on our child. We are. We're the one that knows our child the best. And all the books in the world and the advice and the people on social media, they've got great ideas, but they don't know your child. You are the expert on your child, but we don't feel like that. We feel like we're just not doing the job well.
And, you know, I think, you know, we talk a lot in the community, and I know myself as a mom, there's sometimes I get stuck in that shame storm of when I haven't done it right, and forgetting that we're not the expert. And we also have to be able to get out of our own way as parents and realize that we might need somebody else to help and be our expert. And so I know that there's times where we want to do it all right, but sometimes it's the permission that we have to give ourselves as parents to get it wrong.
Absolutely.
That we're not always going to go at it right the first time, and we might need to say, you know what, that went horribly, let's try this again. And that's a really great reminder that we can instill also in our children.
Yes.
Because our kids aren't always going to get it right either.
No. And I think when you have to back it up and say, I didn't handle that very well, I'm really sorry, that's setting such a perfect example to children that it's not a top-down model, that we're in this together, that we'll blend agendas, and I don't always get it right. I am not, always perfect, and that's, for some parents, that's hard.
And I so appreciate the antidote of I didn't get it right, because there are so many opportunities as adults that we have to be able to model for children just simply the art of saying, I'm sorry, I got it wrong.
Right.
Because I think sometimes in our culture, what we see with our children is that our children are sitting in a space of having to be so perfect and hit the honor roll and hit the team and be the captain and do this and do that. And we sometimes, I watch this from time to time with friends, or even, and I own my own stuff as a parent too, where I may really be striving harder than my child. and forgetting that it's my child's journey.
Right, right. I think we're so passionate about wanting them to have all these opportunities and to do things, and we forget that maybe sometimes that isn't their passion, that it is our passion, and we have to sort of step back. I like to think that with children being involved in things, I think there's 3 things they should be able to say at the end of a sporting event or whatever it is they're involved in. They should be able to say, I came, I participated, I enjoyed it. If they can say those 3 things, it's been a wonderful experience. I won, I was the best isn't part of that equation, because sometimes you're not. And I mentioned in the book, I think my sons learned more from sitting on the bench in baseball and high school than they did playing, because there's a lot of bench sitting in this world. And if you're always on the playing field, if you're always out there, you're never going to really realize. I wanted to make T-shirts that said, bench warmers have warm buns, but I never got those T-shirts made. But I thought maybe that would add a little...
Hold tight, Jason, they might be coming.
a little humor to the situation. But, you know, I reflect back on my own childhood, and one of the biggest gifts my parents gave me was the ability to fail and to get back up and try again. I thought of myself as a failer, not a failure, because the word failure has you in it. A failure is, the situation didn't work, and I got back out there again. And that was a great gift. And I would say that to people, and they'd say, that's horrible. That's a terrible thing. And I'd say, no, it's not. You know, I ran for student council president 4 years in a row. I never won once. I didn't stop trying, you know. Yeah, I was right back in there making those posters. But it's a gift. So it's not always the winning. And I think with competition, we have to just be really cautious with children. Competition and comparison. Those are 2 rough seas, as I talk about in the book, you know, when people are, we naturally compare ourselves, as you were speaking, looking at other, but it's not, it's such a waste of emotional energy, you know, it sure is. It just is, and competition is out there, but not everybody can win. You know?
And that's what, you know, that's one of the lessons that I think, as I remember when I was growing up, there was very much that not everybody won. And then all of a sudden we moved into this movement of
everybody gets a trophy.
Everybody gets a trophy.
Everybody gets a trophy.
And so there was a really hard moment when life became different and everybody didn't win, or you didn't get the job you were looking for, or you didn't make it into the college that you wanted to go to.
Right.
And it was a hard and difficult reality to wrap your head around. And it also, I think, has affected some of how our children learn to fail, and also how we watch children work through when they're not getting it right and they have to be corrected, or what people say is disciplined. And so I think there's many different facets of how disciplining shows up for our kids, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. And I know from reading the book there's some amazing antidotes in there, but I wondered if you would share with us a little bit about what it looks like when kids don't get it right and how we correct or discipline children differently.
Well, I think part of guidance is accountability. You know, we have to help children be accountable for what they do with their lives, and the mistakes that they make and the oopsies that they have. It's so easy to blame it on something else, blame it on someone else, but we have to be accountable for our behavior. I like to think of discipline as guidance. The goal of guidance is self-guidance. We want children to learn how to guide their own behavior, and we have to do that by setting boundaries. They really don't like them. I was the meanest mom in the whole world, and I had such pride in that. I think of boundaries as the guardrails on the Bay Bridge. If we all were going to go over the bridge tomorrow and we got there and it said, come come on over, the guardrails are down being repaired. I doubt many people would get on that bridge. Now, I've never hit the guardrail or even come close to one, but I want to know it's there. And that's what boundaries are for children. It provides them with emotional security. I know somebody is going to keep me from making a huge mistake. And that's what those boundaries, those loving limits. They don't like them, they argue about them, but they're important. I wouldn't get on a highway without a speed limit. You know, even the credit cards, they put limits on us. Life is full of limits. And so I like to think of guidance rather than discipline, and I like to think of consequences rather than punishment. There are consequences for your behavior. And punishment just conjures up all kinds of things in our minds. Consequences need to be immediate. No more wait till your dad gets home. I mean, poor dad. He walks in the door and he's already in trouble and the bad guy. They need to be appropriate. If they leave their bike in the garage, out in the rain, taking dessert away for a week isn't really gonna, you know, help them to figure out the next time I better put the bike away. But if the bike stays in the garage for a week, that's you know, appropriate. And then it needs to be consistent. If it's a consequence for this behavior today, it needs to be for a long period of time. It's hard, but it's so worth it.
I find that you know, lots of folks in the community who will talk with us about the struggles of parenting sometimes will say, I'm just not good at it. I don't do it right. I'm going to do it better than my mom or dad did it. And you and I were doing a program last week where that kind of conversation came up. What do you say to the new moms who are just coming into the parenting journey for the first time and having an expectation of what it's going to look like?
Well, I think every new mom is pregnant with 3 babies. There's the imagined baby, the one that they are just sure they're going to have, the unexpected baby, and then the real baby. And so just chatting, I think, with mothers about what are their expectations and who are their parenting models? What is it that they want for their child? That's a really important thing to think about. We also have imagined, unexpected, and actual school-age children, high school students, adult children. I mean, we sort of carry that whole thing along with us. And I think, you know, just sort of keeping the dialogue opened, it is really, really important. And I've also found with guidance that anticipation reduces frustration.
I love that.
I mean, if you can think about how is this going to be? We lived in Nebraska, and my husband was in med school, and so I had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old that I had to take to the grocery store every day by myself. Not every day, excuse me, every week. It felt like every day. So I'm trying to figure out how is this going to work, because there's one child seat, so that's where the 1-year-old goes, and I've got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old to go with me. So I came up with this idea. My children loved cereal. I mean, that was the best thing in the world to them was cereal. So we made a deal. When you're able to walk through the grocery store, only looking with your eyes and not your hands, then we'll go over and you can pick out a box of cereal. And then you have to hold the cereal in your hands while we check out. So their hands were occupied, so they couldn't be reaching for the lifesavers and the gum. And then it was the last thing that went on the conveyor belt, and then they got their own bag with their own box of cereal, and they held it in their hands on the way home. And then if they didn't hurt each other on the way home, they could go in and have a bowl of their cereal.
It's a long process.
It was a long process, but let me tell you, when you're dangling a box of cereal, they will do anything. It never didn't work. And people would come up to me and go, what do you say to your children? They're following you and they're not doing anything. And I said, we have an agreement. We have an agreement. Yeah. And so just anticipating that this was not, I had to go, you know, and it was either going to be a screaming, threatening, horrible experience, and it turned out to be great. And so while they were eating their cereal, I would put the baby in the playpen. I could empty the car and put the groceries away. So it's just that anticipation. So what's it going to be like? And looking through the eyes of the child, what is it going to be like for them, for being on an airplane for 3 hours? What's that going to be like? Snapped into a thing, you know, think about it, and it does help.
So we can sit here now and we can have these conversations and pull from so much of your own life experience. What do you say to the parent who you run into who's just not in a space to be able to do the anticipating and says, there's no way that I can implement any of this because I'm not a good parent? How do you coach someone in a scenario like that?
First of all, you know, I would look them in the eye and say, you are a good parent. You have, you know, maybe there are some areas. It's hard to do a job well that you've never seen done well. And we have, unfortunately, a lot of people who have never, ever been parented. Never been parented well or not parented at all. It's very hard to do that job. And so that's where resources come in. Finding someone whose parenting style you admire and just modeling and chatting. I think chatting is one of the greatest things. Parents, their schedules are so busy, they don't have time to, and chatting on social media is not the same thing as sitting down and saying one-on-one, you know, you're doing a great job. It may not feel like that. Right. I did not feel like I was doing a great job. Yeah. It just doesn't feel like that. So you've just got to leave yourself open for some adjustments.
Sure. And when we don't get it right as parents, there's the ability to reset. And you know, Brene Brown, who we do a lot of work under, talks about you can't have a conversation when you're not in a good space. So you can't text, email, or respond to a phone call when you're in a heightened stress space.
Right.
So when parents are stressed, what are some of the tools that you would say to utilize to be able to find the space to have that good conversation with their children?
First of all, you've got to honor your needs. You need to nurture yourself first. A exhausted, frustrated person is not helpful for anyone. So we have to find a way to have a space. Whether mine was the bathtub, that was it still is my special spot. All my very good thinking happens in the bathtub. And so I remember going into the bathroom once, and you know how that little gap underneath the door? I had two hands that were pointing out things, and then the face on the floor speaking under the gap. Mom! And I thought, Mom, and then pointing things out, but that was okay, because I was still my moment. So you've got to find a way to nurture yourself first, honor your needs, and then you know you can approach just about anything. But you know, people are pulled in so many different directions. It's hard, but the airlines got it right. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first. You're not going to be helpful to anybody if you're gasping for air. So we need, but that feels so selfish, because especially when you haven't been with your child all day. And that 1 hour after a child comes home and you're all there together, I call it the witching hour. Because it used to break my heart when folks would pick up their children from childcare and they'd say, what is he like here? Because when I take him home, he's just angry and wild and frustrated, and and we would make the mistake of saying, oh, he's great here, which now makes the mother feel like, or the dad, like what, I bring out the worst in him. And Dr. Brazelton, who I had the pleasure of working with, pointed out that children and even adults have to hold it together all day long. But once they come home, it's a safe space. They can let it out because they know they will be loved, and it's a safe spot for them to be. So, you know, it doesn't feel like a compliment, but it is. You know, it's people, they can only hold it together for so long.
And I imagine in those moments how we are interacting with our kids and the questions that we're asking make a difference. And so it would make sense that the questions like, how was your day, which leaves it open to good or bad,
right.
is different than tell me about the best part of your day. Can you talk a little bit about some of the language that we can use with our children?
Yeah, tell me more is interesting. Tell me about. Any question that can be answered yes or no will always be answered yes or no. and then you've asked 14 questions and you've gotten yes and no 14 times, and then they walk off and it's like, was that a conversation or an interrogation? We need to think about, because sometimes we just keep hammering home with, okay, well, what happened this and what happened there? And not trying to use active listening, which is, tell me about, or you seem worried about what happened at school today. And just lay it out there. Silence is great, and it's uncomfortable. And if you just, and for me, it's really hard to not talk. I'm a fixer. I want to fix everything. I want to make everything okay. It's really hard for me to just not say anything and just listen and have them. I remember once one of the boys came home and he was furious because he'd been fussed at in phys ed because he had the wrong socks on. So and he came in and said, phys ed was terrible, and she's a mean teacher, and instead of me saying, what did you do? Or I said, so PE was a little rough today. You bet it was rough. I got yelled at because I didn't have the right socks on. The mother in me wanted to say, what do you mean you didn't have the right socks on? I sent you those socks. You know where those socks are. I said, so you didn't have the right socks on? No, I didn't have them on. I didn't put them on because they were my... And what happened in the course of 5 minutes, he admitted it was his fault. And all I did was reflect.
Right.
It takes a little more time, but it is so worth it. It's just worth reflecting rather than interrogating.
And giving them the space to also learn the skills and tools. One of the things we talk about a lot is that, no one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to make this a horrible day, or I want to have a horrible day.
Right.
And usually it's not people's lack of will, it's people's lack of skill. And I think that so applies with our children.
Absolutely.
Because if we fix it all for them, then we're not helping to guide them, we are sending them to the end of the journey.
Right.
And that journey of learning skills and tools can be so important to a child.
Absolutely, and it's hard not to be a fixer because we want things to go well.
And we have the idea of, well, why wouldn't you get it right? Or the socks were in there, so logically it makes sense that A goes to B goes to C.
Right.
And there's a big difference in how our children might process information from one side to the other.
And we used to do what we called the crisis call, but now I'd like to think of it more as a catch-up call. Before my husband would come home, he would call, and I could give him the rundown. I've already told this one you cannot spend the night. I've already, don't ask about the math test. Ask about what happened. So that when he walked in the door, it wasn't like walking in to Pandora's box. I mean, he had an idea of what had already been discussed in the witching hour, and so it was a good catch-up time for him to feel like he was all part of the equation.
Yeah. So part of the other thing that you and I have talked a lot about, and I think is so important as we think about raising our children and being around kids who are being raised, is having fun.
Yes.
And I would love for you to just share some of the antidotes and the nuggets that you have about the importance of fun and laughter in children's lives through this journey of this whole thing that we call parenting.
Well, I think if through anticipation and taking situations, we can ease our frustration and our anger. And when we're not angry, we're having fun. I think it's important for families to have a no electronic time where our kids used to call it, when the power would go out, they call it pioneer families. And we have to get the candles and we play games, and they were always, pioneer families suck, and it's like, well, and then, kind of, but, if we can just turn off the world for a little while and laugh at just funny, crazy things. One year I decided, the boys were adults, that we would give each other our presents, not presents, that are emotional and physical presents, and that we would turn off the electronics for one day. The calendar was clear, and I came up with this little exercise where I had them write down, how would you describe your family to someone else? And my favorite trip was, and I just open-ended questions, and of course I got the rolling eyes and the, oh, she's been to another conference, and it's a kumbaya moment, and what are we going to do now? Well, interestingly enough, they started writing, and it's almost like they couldn't stop. But what was so interesting to me is their favorite family trip, they never talked about where we went. They talked about what we did getting there. They talked about the time in the car, because we didn't have TVs and computers and iPads and everything in the car. We were singing songs, we were playing those crazy games. That was what was so important to them. They never mentioned all those things we saved money to take them to. It was the time together in the car. So it's the journey, not the destination.
Yeah.
And I think that that's so important. It really is. And you also have to have fun as a parent. I'll share this one anecdote. One of the rules was no food in the bedroom. And boy, are they creative. They are so creative. I would go upstairs and find, memories of things that used to be edible and were now awful looking, stuck in places I couldn't even imagine. And I would come storming down the steps. And this one particular day, they had already gone to school, and I was so angry because I had and they assured me there was no food in the bedrooms. And I went outside to do something, and there is a God. It was probably a cicada. There was a bug about this big on the ground, dead as a doornail. I went in and I got my tongs. I picked that sucker up. I put him right in the middle of their bedroom, and I waited till they got home. I said, hey, guys, go up. Change your clothes. I'll get your snacks. They go running up, and blood-curdling scream. Oh my, Mom, there's this bug. It's huge. It's in the bedroom. And I went, oh my gosh. I said, you don't have any food up there, do you? And they were like, no. And I said, because that's what they're after. That bug is after food. And if there was food in the bedroom, that's what he's looking for. And they were like, oh, and I said, and they come like with families. So if there's one bug, never had food in the bedroom after that. That was the logical consequence.
I'm going to invest in dead cicadas as a parent.
It was like, I couldn't believe it. I could not wait for them to come home from school that day. I was like, yay, I can't wait. But the look on their faces was great. But it was a logical consequence. I didn't have to say anything anymore.
Right. Yeah.
There was logical consequences. If you eat we used to have snack baskets. If you eat all the snacks in your snack basket, it's empty.
Right,
You know,
right.
There's no more snacks.
There's no
you know,
more.
That's a logical consequence for.
Yeah. Well, I really feel like before we turn it over to our audience to be able to do some Q&A, that it would be really important for them to understand why the book is called Behind the Brussels Sprouts.
Oh, yeah. Well, my boys hated Brussels sprouts, as most children do, and their mother. And way back when, they were all frozen. So whenever we would move or get a new refrigerator, and on a regular basis, I would buy a box of Brussels sprouts and put them in the freezer where they were very visible. And behind the Brussels sprouts was the Ben & Jerry's ice cream, the Girl Scout cookies, and the good chocolate, because they would never touch the box. They were so afraid that the Brussels sprouts would ooze through the packaging and get in their hands that they never touched the box. And so that was my hidey hole, was the box of Brussels sprouts. And they didn't know about it until I wrote the book. They didn't know about they didn't know about the bug until I wrote the book. There's a lot of other things in there that I just surprised them with.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's where the title comes. And our grandson did the illustration of the refrigerator and the Brussels sprouts. So it was a joint family affair.
Yeah. Well, this is a really big evening for you. I know you and I have talked for a couple of years now about your journey in finishing this book. Going off script, just, the two of us sitting here talking, would you share with us what your hope is for the book launch and what you hope tonight begins for this community?
I just want to get the book in the hands of people, parents, grandparents, friends of parents. I want them to read it, to laugh, which is so important. I want them to relax a bit with their parenting, and reflect about. There's a blank page at the end of each chapter, and that's because as they're reading the stories and thinking about things, I want them. They have stories, and I wrote mine down for years. It took 30 years to write that book. And 30 years of notes and anecdotes and stories. And so I just want parents to read it and think, that's a possibility. What if I tried this? That's my goal. I loved every minute of it. It's writing is not for the faint of heart. People who write novels on a regular basis, oh my goodness, I admire them. Because at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd be lying there going, okay, now if I said this and I didn't do, so that's my goal. And the opportunity through 4 All Seasons to do this, to just get the book out there and to make it available is just, it's such a gift, and I so appreciate it.
Yeah, well, and we appreciate you. And one of the things we talk about a lot with mental health is that sometimes we just have to have the conversation. And it's something that we forget to do. We forget that in order to break down stigma, in order to be able to bring community together, that in order for us as parents and as caregivers to get out of our own way sometimes, we have to be able to say, oh my gosh, this is what's happening. And more times than not, we hear from those around us, oh my gosh, your child too? And I think that's a really important component. And I go back to this book time and time again, and I have done exactly what you say. I mean, I've written some little stories down. It's a really good tracker for what's happening in families. And I think it's just a wonderful gift that you've given to us as a community. I do want to turn it over to our audience to see if there are any questions and answers. Lauren has a microphone if there's anyone who has any questions for Lynn about the book or about children in general. I will kick us off. We have a question on Facebook. Someone has written, I have a child who is extremely willful and is very difficult to guide. Do you have any suggestions for working with children who are so determined to do what they want to do?
Gosh, I can't imagine having a child like that.
Me either.
Or maybe 2 or 3. We never want to discourage willfulness, because we want children to be able to have a mind of their own. But with that, they need parameters. And I always found that contracts were a good thing. When, I don't know if as parents, if any of you had ever heard this or scenario, something like this. If I can just spend the night with so-and-so, I promise that when I get home, I'll mow the yard. And then they come home looking like roadkill, and they're not going to mow the yard. And then I would just go, and my children used to call it hyperspastic. That was their name for watching me. I must have been so entertaining. So we instigated contracts with, if it was written down, they signed it, and it was like, I can spend the night with so-and-so, but when I come home, I will mow the grass. They signed it, I signed it, and the deal was that if they didn't honor the contract, then the next thing that came along, whether it was to go to Disney World or to go get a Slurpee, it wasn't an option. And they never broke a contract. And so I think willful children, egg timers work beautifully.
Yeah.
Where you just set a timer and say, okay, for the next X number of minutes, you set the timer. And then you let the child set the timer for you. Because it needs to work both ways.
Yeah.
But I think that those loving limits and those boundaries have to be in place. And especially willful children will just keep battering, but staying calm and staying on task works well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be exhausting.
It is exhausting.
It can be exhausting.
It is exhausting. And the other thing that's exhausting and scary is when you see yourself in your child. It's like, oh no, oh, that's scary, Yeah.
Yeah. We have another question. There has been a lot of social and emotional damage from the pandemic. Do you have any suggestions on how to help kids rebuild the skills that they may have lost? And can you think of any small daily tasks that you can do as a parent to help children along?
I think one of the things I would really, really like to do is a project called Let's Face It, because children have been seeing people from here, and they're forgetting how to read body language, which is over 50% of communication. And so I think it's important with socialization. It's a learned skill, but it has to be practiced.
Sure.
And so in small doses, group gatherings can be a little overwhelming depending on the temperament of the child. But I think just playing games like getting the comics out and saying, okay, today's emotion is sad. How many faces in the comics in the newspaper today do you see? Who can circle the most? So now we're getting children thinking about emotions, thinking about other people's emotions and how they work, and trying to get them back out there. And I think limiting electronics. I mean, we depend on it. They're not going away. The chapter's called Power Outage because we turn over our power to the device when we use it. And it's hard for children. It's baby steps, but consistency and wondering with children. So, how do you think that little girl in the grocery store feels right now? I wonder what this is. Every time you read a book or you see something on television, you wonder with them, and providing some emotional security, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with someone in the community and someone said that because of Google, children have lost their ability to wonder.
They do.
And how important it is for children to be able to think about solutions without going right to Google. And my 12-year-old and I were coming back from a baseball game the other night, and I asked him a question, and within 2 seconds, and we have in my house what I call the no phone zone. So my boys know, and I always set it up ahead of time. Saturday is a no phone zone. Mommy's not allowed to be on her phone unless it's an emergency with work, and the phones go in the basket in the kitchen. And I said to him, this is a no phone zone from baseball to home. And within 2 seconds, he was on that phone Googling whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I said to him, what do you think would have happened if you didn't have the answer? And he said, well, I would have had to wonder about it. And so we talked about the benefit of trying to imagine if you
Right.
couldn't Google it.
Right, right. I like to look at the word awe, A-W-E, and I think the letters should, in my mind, they stand for always wonder every day.
I love
Because if you always wonder every day, you will be in awe.
That's wonderful.
You will be in awe of what's going on around you. You're not going to see it. I remember teaching 3-year-olds, and I loved the Pokey Little Puppy, and would just, go on and on and on about it. And all of a sudden, one year, I got the book out, and I have more fun reading it than they did listening to it. And they were like, we saw the movie.
Oh.
We've seen the video. They're 3.
Right.
It broke my heart. I mean, I was crushed.
Yeah. Lauren, is there a question in the audience?
Yeah. Thank you all for having this evening. My kids are mostly grown. I screwed them up a long time ago, so I wish I had met you a long time ago. Kind of tapping into that last question, though, I do a lot of community development work now, and I'm loving the individual nature of how you're thinking about parenting. But for both of you, because I know For All Seasons is in that space, when we do think about the mental health aspects of children writ large right now, how should we be thinking about that from a policy and from a education standpoint? Like how, because it's as I hear it from the community, it's such a big challenge right now that it's almost like it's become so insurmountable that people don't even know how to chunk it down. Obviously, there could be the answer of, well, it's just going to take every individual child at home, but is there something in between?
I think from our agency's standpoint, one of the things that you just identified is sometimes it becomes so large. And I was just having a conversation with one of our community partners today, and I said, we've listed off 10 things. Let's start with one. We can start with the small thing, because sometimes we become so overwhelmed at the list of things that are not going right that we can tend to forget about the things that are going well. And I think it feeds so much into what Lynn's book is about and what she and I talk about, is that we forget about some of the gifts that are given. And if we can take small nuggets of information, like our hope is that tonight everyone's going to take 2 or 3 nuggets home with them of something that they can try. And so if we can approach the community, children are human beings, and no one child is going to need the same thing from every person that they interact with, no different than we can't treat all children the same. And trying to be able to show up as our best selves in a world where we are looking at children as individuals and recognizing that how we treat one child might need to be different for the next sibling. I think there's sometimes we get caught in the trap of, well, your older brother did it just fine, your younger brother might not do it, the same way. So I think from the mental health standpoint from our kids, listening. I say to people so often when I'm doing interviews or when I'm teaching a class, I'm a clinician by training. I will wait you out in silence very comfortably for a long time. But sometimes when we're talking with kids, we forget to listen. Or we're listening to respond rather than listening to hear. And so if we find ourselves listening to respond, then maybe we're not hearing what our child is trying to tell us.
And I think we have to be very, very aware that children and adults, we need emotional safety. And it's not a safe feeling world right now. Children have little shoulders about this wide, and there's so much heaped on them. They're bombarded with the television and things on the internet, and everything is coming at them. We need to be sure they have a place where they can be emotionally safe, where they can feel what they feel and say what they want to say, and it's okay. It's accepted. We all need that so desperately. And we need to help children be able to verbalize what they're feeling. so many times we make the mistake of telling them how they feel. Oh, you're okay. It'll be fine. We need to help them put words to what does sad feel like, and just talking. I mean, there's like as I said with the comics and books, there's a million opportunities to discuss how do you feel about that? How was that for you? And then listen and just wait for the answer, because we don't have a lot of places for emotional safety, and I think we've got to be sure that we have them. For so many years it was schools for children who didn't have it at home, or it was neighborhoods, and it's all in an upheaval. So we have to be sure, we have to make a conscious effort to make sure that every person, ourselves included, have a space and an opportunity to feel emotionally safe and to be allowed to feel what we're feeling and to be able to say it.
And that reminds me, and I think we're in a time right now when we talk about safety for children. We've had a lot of discussions, and I've been doing a lot of talks in our community around the shooting in Texas. And Lynn and I were just talking that there was another incident with a shooting in the state of Maryland tonight. And I think one of the largest questions that has been asked is, should I have the conversation with my child? And my answer to everyone has been along the lines of that safety, yes. Because if you are not having that conversation with your child, someone else is going to have it for them. Or they're going to learn about it in another way. And one of the things that we know is that humans are hardwired for connection. We do a lot of work with Brene Brown, and she always says that what people want the most is to be seen, heard, and valued. And I am a firm believer that when you look at the ability for a child to be seen, heard, and valued, you find your best child. And when one of those things isn't working well, that's when anger shows up. That's when sadness shows up. I mean, think about it, for ourselves as adults. If we're not feeling seen, heard, and valued, we're not able to be at our best selves. And I think there is something to be said as we think about the community response to the pandemic and what's happening in our schools and just our children's mental health overall. It's really important if we can think through the lens of, is the child in front of me being seen, heard, and valued in a way that they can show up as their best selves? I do want to make sure that we get to one of the questions on the Facebook page, that how do we apply some of this to children with disabilities?
I think we take children where they are. I think we know developmentally that there may be some delays, but they're going to develop, they're going to take a different path. And so it's that same celebrating and making it appropriate for the child. I mean, it's the same way with personalities. It's the same way with different temperaments. We look at the child, we take them where they are, and it is a little bit of trial and error. It is a little bit. It's very different because it's a different set of things. But again, I always like to think of them as they're a child with a disability in their life. They're a child first. They have the same needs and desires and wants that every child has. And I've always, and children develop at their own speed. I've always said, if I said, okay, let's all meet in New York City, and everybody that shows up will get $1,000, but we're going to meet at noon on Saturday, some people would, leave tomorrow. Some will take a plane, some will drive, but they'll all get there. And that's the way it is with development. And so we follow their lead, and we just make everything that it's appropriate for where they are. We take them where they are.
I love that. I love that. Another question that I can't wait for the answer on, because my children, being two boys that are only 21 months apart, I think maybe somebody wrote this question for me. So the question is, I have two very competitive children who seem to fight. So what are the strategies that you have in helping siblings to get along?
Wow, our children, they competed brushing their teeth. The minute their feet hit the floor, it was a competition. And it just has to, and I was an only child, and so I had no one to compete with. I mean, the first time my children yelled at each other, I was devastated. I just couldn't imagine anybody speaking to me like that as a child. I was just, and by the time they got over it in 4 seconds, and I was just like still trying to work through it. I think competition has got to be put in its place. I think you have to look at it and set up situations where they, on a level playing field, can compete. But then at other times, this is not a competition.
Yeah.
This is not a race. Setting those boundaries again. You know, this is a time when we, I'll share this story with you. Our children, early on in the AIDS discussion, they had a talk at school about AIDS, and that you could, you know, how it was transmitted before we knew very much about AIDS. So my husband goes up to put them to bed, and here are 4 sets of eyes just like this. And he said, "What's the matter?" And they said, "Well, they told us today that you can get AIDS from using somebody else's toothbrush, and I just used his toothbrush. Am I going to get AIDS?" And Rob said, "Well, but one of you has to have it." Oh, so it's an example of how literal children take everything. And sometimes as parents, we set them up to compete.
Yeah.
When we compare, well, you know, your brother is able to get down to breakfast 10 minutes before you are. We've set up a competition. And so I think we have to be very cautious about setting some parameters. This is a competition zone.
Yeah.
It's not who can eat their dinner fast.
Right.
You know, just chew your food and swallow. We're not competing right now. There are no winners here. Yeah. But then allow them to have their moments where they compete.
I love that. A question in the audience?
How do you handle bullying as a parent? That may be too broad for the discussion.
Wow, that's a tough. We've always had bullies, but the bully stayed on the other side of the door. The bully stayed at school. In my generation, now bullies come home with us. They follow us. We can't get away from them. There are 4 goals of misbehavior. One is attention, and negative attention is better than no attention at all. If you don't feel like you're getting, if you're, as parents, are distracted, or the people around you are distracted for whatever reason, if you do something negative, you'll get their attention. So attention is a goal of misbehavior. Power is a goal of misbehavior, and most children that grab power and bully feel very powerless in most of their life. Revenge, and that's the other one. I want you to feel as bad about yourself as I feel about me, and that's what a bully is doing. And then the third one is hiding an inadequacy. I don't want you to know I can't do this, so I'll misbehave, and you'll move me aside, and I won't have to do it. Bullies have to. The topic of bully has to be discussed. Bullies don't feel good about themselves. If you feel good about yourself, you never, ever, ever have to make anybody else feel bad. So we can't fix the bully, but we can fix the person or help the person fix themselves that's being bullied. We have to champion the child. You know, they're saying this about you, it's wrong. They're wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. You're a special person. It's very hard because that bully is right there in their hand and is sending out things to people that aren't true, and trying to combat that is unimaginable. I can't imagine as an adult, but I've never met a bully that ever felt good about themselves. And so we have to help the person who's being bullied understand that this bully is a pretty unhappy person, and that he may feel like he has a lot of power, but he doesn't. He doesn't. And only you can allow the bully to have power over you. It's all up to you how much power you give anything like that in your life. And that's hard. That's a really hard thing, but you make the decision. How much, but it takes lots of conversations. That's a great question, and certainly a huge, we get bullied as adults. We really do. We get bullied as adults, and we have to realize that this is not a happy person, and that this person is not going to give up. They want you to feel as bad about yourself as they feel about themselves, and they're going to work hard at it. And we just have to help the person decide how much power that person or that event is going to have in their life. And it takes time, but it's so worth it. So worth it.
I would love to go off of Mary Lee's question and end this as our final question. So we talk about children and resiliency a lot, and you hear that in the news. It's like the new buzzword that is always attached when there's a child conversation going on. And so when we think about that child who might be experiencing bullying, or we think about a child who we're trying to work with to build them to be their best self, what are some of the tips and tools that you would leave parents with tonight in building a child's self-esteem and being able to dig into their best selves as a parent?
I think children have got to be able to feel that they do something correct. And so every single day they should be able to finish the sentence, I am a good, and I like to think of self-comfort more than self-esteem, because self-esteem is a very fragile thing. You can feel really good about yourself for a long period of time, and then the whole thing collapses, and your self-esteem is just so fragile. Self-comfort is, I like myself. I'm comfortable with me. I got a lot of stuff to work on, but I'm still comfortable with me. It's helping children understand what they do best. And when we talk about parents needing to think about what they do best, children need to think about how they're comfortable, that they do things for self-satisfaction, not for external. And I think we really have to be cautious with praise. I think praise can really erode that. If I say to parents, if it's the best, the prettiest, the greatest, they're going to run out of adjectives before the child's 5. If it's the prettiest picture, then why would you work hard on another picture? So I like to think of acknowledgement. I acknowledge that, wow, you spent a long time on that picture. You used a lot of different colors. It's not putting a value on it. Praise puts a value on things. And I think if we can help children, so how did you feel when you made that? How did that feel for you? Rather than telling them, because what happens is we create praise addicts where people do things just for the praise.
Right.
And it doesn't feel good. And we all know in life there's moments where you do your best stuff and nobody sees it.
Yes, absolutely. I think we have one more question. Okay.
And you've talked briefly about competition. And I think in a lot of cases, we teach competition. We have our children competing in sports, sometimes 2 sports at a time, while at the same time, in fact, it goes on 7 days a week.
Yes.
You know, and on the other side, when in a more traditional fashion, we would have our children in Sunday school. They would be getting empathy training at the same time. That offsets some of this kind of aggressive competition that we're teaching them. And then when you come into the home, you know, siblings try to establish a pecking order, and they always do, as much as we try to fight it.
That's right.
Yes.
And it's all part of that. So keeping this competition under control, while at the same time not hurting their motivation, but at the same time giving them some empathy.
Absolutely.
How do we meet that challenge?
Well, another great question. Going back to the motive behind what you're doing. I mean, if you're competing to win, that's going to be a long journey, because there aren't always going to be wins. And so I think really clarifying, okay, this is a good thing to compete about. We're playing a game. You're outside playing, a ball. You're doing something. It's okay to compete, but this is not a competition over here. I think we need to use those words. This is not a competition. We're just having we're having an interaction, but we're not competing. We adults compete at work. Our whole lives are around competitions. Video games, all you're doing is competing. You're competing against a machine, but you're competing. And it's hard to take that off. And it's hard to understand what it feels like to be the other person that's not doing well in the competition. And that's that empathy piece. Empathy has to be modeled, and it has to be encouraged. It's not a natural instinct. And it's something, so I think it's putting parameters on it, keeping competition in its place. It's hard to turn on anything that's not a competition. So I think as with anything, you talk about it. It's got to be out on the table, Okay, I'm glad to see you guys competing in that game, but the game is over, and now we're gonna, carry on.
And I hear you ask the question as it relates to sports, and I'm a mom who has 2 young boys who play 2 sports and play travel, and yes, it becomes that 5, 6, 7 day a week activity. I think one of the things I've learned the most in the last 18 months is that paying attention to your child in that time and watching for the joy. And when the joy is shifting, at the age of 10, a child should still be finding joy in what they're doing.
Right.
And sometimes we dismiss what our kids are saying about the loss of joy, and we have to pay attention. If your child is saying, I don't want to go to practice, I don't want to do this, and if we are forcing them in one direction because it's the right thing to do, but our child is taking the loss in their mental health because of it, it's okay to take a step back as a parent and say, maybe this is not something that's healthy for the child.
Yeah.
And so I think that listening and making sure that when we are engaging our children in activities, that we are not giving so much power over to the person who's in charge of that activity to have behaviors and maybe discipline happening in a way that, well, he's the coach, so that's just what happens. We still have to maintain a role. I always say, when my boys play baseball, and I always say there's 3 roles that happen on a field. You're the coach, an umpire, or a parent. And you need to know your role, and you need to stay in it, but sometimes a parent knows their child best. And so sometimes there is a time where parents need to step in and say, the behavior that's happening is not okay, or what my child is feeling at the end of practice isn't the best for my child. And I'm all about, growing skills, but we need to be thinking about the activities we can place our children in when they are young, not to go into the MLB or to the NFL, but what are the skills that are going to grow that child so that they're going to enjoy what they're doing in middle school and high school, and have the opportunity to be able to flourish as whole children, not just be focused in on one activity.
Right. And that becomes their identity.
Right.
I'm a baseball player.
Yeah.
I'm no longer a 9-year-old. I'm a baseball player.
Yeah.
I'm a good baseball player. That's a good thing to say, but that isn't all there is to that child.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes they get narrowed into that identity, and they forget about the rest.
Yeah. Thank you for all of your questions tonight. I'm so thrilled to have Lynn with us.
Oh, thank you.
I do just want to let you all know that For All Seasons website has lots of talking tips, especially around all that's happening in our country right now. We certainly have information about Behind the Brussels Sprouts on our Facebook page, which is For All Seasons Behavioral Health and RCC. I want to thank Lynn for being here, all of you for being here in the audience, to all of you who have been watching online. We're grateful that you have been with us this evening. Again, for those of you here in person, please don't walk out without getting your signed copy of Behind behind the Brussels sprouts. Lynn is going to be doing a lot of work with us moving forward as a faculty member through our Center for Learning. So you'll continue to see Lynn Sanchez's name all around town. We're grateful that you were here with us tonight, and thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you've imparted on us.
I loved every moment. Thank you so much.